Now, Inoue is a system of pressure, straight lines, fast traps, and ruthless finishes. But Bam's footwork changes the map. The question is simple. Can Inoue destroy a fighter who refuses to stand where the monster needs to be? So this is not just speed against power. It's more like geometry against violence. Because Bam, figuratively speaking, fights east and west, Inoue attacks north and south. That clash, it changes everything. Now Ward, the great Andre Ward, calls Bam a violent jazz player, while Roy Jones, the great Roy Jones, says beating Inoue would make him #1. But one problem remains. Can Bam take the punch? Okay, so this is my perspective. This is my perspective on a conversation between Roy Jones and Andre Ward concerning Naoya Inoue and Bam Rodriguez. Of course, when we speak of Roy Jones and Andre Ward, they are both legends, both elite boxers. So let's begin. So the first statement is that Andre Ward describes Bam as a violent jazz player, very figurative. A feet-first fighter who basically uses lateral angles to disorientate before delivering precision shots that compound into power. So let's break that down. I think one of the important weapons that Bam brings to the table, one of the important weapons is his feet. It's his footwork. His footwork, typically when we think of footwork, we think of it as a defensive. It's part of your defensive toolkit. But in the context of Bam, it's part of his offensive weaponry, and it's extremely, extremely impressive. It sets up attacks, it controls distance, and it confuses opponents. So I think the biggest part of the puzzle that Naoya Inoue needs to solve if and when he fights Bam is the footwork, because his footwork is so efficient and is so innovative that you can make a case that this is a particular style that he has not seen before. Because I can't think of anyone who's fought Naoya Inoue that will present the footwork the same way that Bam Rodriguez will present his footwork. So that's a very good observation. And then the second observation comes from Roy Jones, who says that a Bam win over Inoue makes him #1 pound-for-pound fighter. So basically, Naoya Inoue, some would put him at #2 or #1 on the pound-for-pound list. But if Bam was to beat Naoya Inoue, that means that Bam would inherit that pound-for-pound title glory. And I think that there would be a strong case for that. Of course, we would have to look at the manner of the victory. If he was to beat Naoya Inoue in a dominating fashion, then I think that logic would be sufficient. If it was a contested decision, then I'm not so sure. So I think it depends on the context of the victory, but a dominant victory, either by a unanimous decision or by a knockout or a stoppage, would definitely put him up there, and it would accelerate his status. And let's be honest here, Naoya Inoue is risking everything, or is risking a lot more by fighting Bam. Bam, I would say, is a good fighter, perhaps a great fighter, but Inoue is already a legend. So in a sense, if Bam and Inoue get in the ring, it's a massive risk for Naoya Inoue, because he's putting his legendary status on the line. And then the next statement is that Ward and Jones, they both agree, and they're talking about Bam here, is that Bam should have one more fight at super bantamweight first. And basically the way they're framing this is that this is not cowardice. Maybe some Naoya Inoue fans would state that that's cowardice, but it's not cowardice, it's calculated. Because if you walk straight into Inoue's weight class cold, it's a sufficient risk that will hinder your chances of victory. So I guess what they're stating here is that he needs to have like 1 or 2 warm-up fights to really set the scene for him to be able to compete with a Naoya Inoue, because he needs to not only fight Naoya Inoue, but he needs to acclimatize to the weight difference, and that is significant. Staying with this weight thing, or this weight context, Ward actually uses his own professional experience to justify this, and he gives the experience of the Kovalev fight. So we can call this like the Kovalev blueprint as a proof of concept. And what he stated is that before he engaged in that fight, he demanded 2 tune-ups before moving up to light heavyweight. And basically, I guess from his perspective, that enabled him to acclimatize to the weight. I'm not sure if acclimatize is the right word, but it enabled him to carry the weight or to perform at an elite level at that weight. Because obviously he's performing at an elite level at super middleweight, but then when you're jumping up a weight, it's essential, according to Andre Ward, that you have that tune-up. And against Kovalev, he had 2 tune-ups to be able to not only perform at an elite level at super middleweight, but also to be able to perform at an elite level going higher. And then the next statement here is that the tactical contrast is a puzzle. So it's the contrast between both Inoue and Bam, which is the puzzle, because, and I love this figurative language, it's like Bam is east-west, lateral angles make Inoue hunt him, while Inoue you can describe figuratively as a north-south fighter, which is explosive, straight line aggressive. And even though they might have these different ways in their attack, the premise here is that both boxers, they get hit, and because they get hit, this will create, you know, a potentially huge spectacle. I would say, though, that both boxers are defensively responsible, especially in Inoue's last fight against Nakatani. I think he really did show defensive responsibility, and he did show some good footwork. However, because Bam and Inoue are offensive-minded fighters, because they will unload with combinations and go through the phases of punches, there will always be counter-punching opportunities, but they are still defensively responsive fighters. It's just that because they like to be aggressive, here's another way to put it. If every time you throw a punch, you're susceptible to getting hit, or you're more susceptible to getting hit. And these are offensive-minded fighters as opposed to defensive-minded fighters. However, they're both still elite defensively. And then the next part is that the fight basically reduces to the question of, can Bam absorb Inoue's punch? Is he able to take those punches at a higher weight class? And I guess the premise of understanding that question is, how good is Bam's punch resilience? At this point in time, I can't even answer that question. I don't know if he has been hurt before. So, you know, with certain fighters, they might have a history where they've been either knocked out in the amateurs, or even if they're undefeated as professionals, or they've been knocked out in sparring or knocked down in sparring. I'm not sure of the history of Bam with regards to his punch resistance. And even so, does his punch resistance hold in his current weight, but will he be able to take that punch resistance with him? I'm not sure. And if there is that concern of whether he can take Inoue's power, does that affect his offensive-minded mentality? Does that affect him psychologically and make him fight differently, which could be a negative thing? Because when you take a fighter away from their identity, let's say this is their identity, an offensive-minded fighter, but because the context is different, they move into a defensive-minded strategy. Yes, it can create an element of surprise, but by taking away the identity of the fighter, that can also be a detriment depending on the execution. I guess the premise here from Roy Jones and Andre Ward is that if Bam can absorb Inoue's punch, his footwork will win rounds and therefore increase the possibility of, you know, getting a points victory. However, if he cannot sustain the punches from Inoue, then this potentially could be an early night. So here is my final statement. Think of this. Inoue has destroyed systems with pressure, with timing and violence. But Bam does not fight in a straight line. He moves, he shifts, he makes champions reset. That is why this fight may feel different. It is not just power against skill, it is control against chaos. If Bam takes the punch, his footwork could change everything. But if he cannot take the punch, Inoue reminds everyone why he is the monster. So that's the end of the video. Now I'm trying to build a digital boxing community. That means I'm interested in your comments, I'm interested in your questions, and I'm interested in your observations. Now if you want to support the channel, simply like and subscribe and click the hype button. And if you want to watch more content like this, then simply click here or click here. As always, thanks for your time. It is much appreciated.